"I will warm your bed, human. My child needs a father. The widow's begs at my door." The sky was heavy with clouds, and a soft rain began to fall, tapping gently against the windows of a small, modest house at the edge of town. Inside, the man sat alone in his living room, wrapped in a worn blanket, drinking a cup of tea. He enjoyed these quiet moments after a long day, moments when the world outside seemed to fade away. Life had taught him to appreciate silence, the kind that allowed him to think without interruption. He was used to being alone, and he found a strange comfort in it. The gentle sound of rain soon turned into a soft drizzle, and the rhythmic tapping on the roof became a soothing companion to his thoughts. He had always lived a simple life, free from complication, yet also free from the warmth of companionship. His neighbors were kind but distant, and his colleagues at work knew him only as polite and quiet. He liked it this way. Life was predictable, and he found peace in its regularity. But even in peace, there was a small ache in his chest, a feeling that something was missing. As he stared out the window, he noticed a figure appearing through the rain, moving slowly along the narrow path leading to his house. At first, he thought it might be a lost traveler or perhaps someone looking for shelter from the rain. But as the figure drew closer, he realized it was a woman. She moved with caution, carrying something in her arms. Her clothes were soaked, and the fabric clung to her body as if it had absorbed the storm itself. There was a look of urgency in her eyes, but also a kind of vulnerability that tugged at the man's heart. Before he could even decide what to do, there was a soft knock at the door. It was hesitant, almost timid, as if the person outside was unsure of what they would find. The man felt a mixture of surprise and concern. He wasn't expecting anyone, certainly not in the middle of a rainy evening. He set down his cup and went to the door, careful not to open it too quickly. Through the small window on the door, he could see the woman clearly. She was young, perhaps in her late 20s, and her face carried the marks of recent hardship. But it was her eyes that caught him most. They were wide, earnest, and filled with a silent plea. When he opened the door, the cold rain immediately hit him, sending a shiver down his spine. The woman stepped forward, hesitating slightly as she tried to shield a small child in her arms from the falling drops. The child was no more than 3 years old, his tiny face pressed against his mother's chest, clutching a small blanket. The sight was enough to stop the man for a moment. The child's innocent eyes met his, and he could see both fear and trust in that gaze. It was a powerful moment, one that spoke without words. The woman spoke first, her voice soft but urgent. "Please, I have nowhere else to go. My child, he needs care. I don't have anyone else." There was a pause as she tried to steady her breathing, her words breaking slightly. The man could see her lips tremble and her hands shake. She was clearly exhausted, soaked from the rain, and carrying a weight far greater than he could imagine. Her plea was simple, but it carried with it a depth of desperation that was impossible to ignore. He looked down at the child again, noting the way he clung to his mother. The little boy's eyes were wide with curiosity and fear, his tiny fingers gripping the wet fabric of her coat. The man felt a pang of empathy he hadn't felt in years. He had always cared for others in small ways, helping a neighbor, offering advice, or listening to a friend's troubles. But he had never been confronted with such raw need. The situation made him uneasy, yet something inside him stirred, a part of him that wanted to help, to offer comfort. The woman took a deep breath and continued, "I know this might sound strange, but I don't have money and I have nowhere to stay. I don't know who else to turn to. Please, if you can, help us, even for a little while. My son needs a safe place tonight." Her voice quivered and she looked directly at him, her eyes pleading. The man noticed the honesty in her words. There was no arrogance, no false pride, just a simple, desperate request for help. He hesitated. He wasn't used to people asking for help in such a personal way. His life had been orderly, predictable, and he had never encountered a situation quite like this. He thought about closing the door, about telling her to go somewhere else, somewhere safer. But he couldn't. He looked at the child again, noticing the small, nervous movements, the way his tiny hands reached out for comfort. It was a human connection, simple and undeniable. Finally he spoke, his voice calm but cautious. "Come in, quickly." He stepped aside to let her enter, and she did so immediately, careful not to slip on the wet floor. The child followed, his little feet making soft splashes on the tiles. The man closed the door behind them, shutting out the rain, but the weight of the moment remained. He looked at them both, unsure of what the next step would be. The woman placed the child down on a small rug in the living room. He looked around with wide eyes, curious but cautious, and then smiled faintly when he saw a small stack of toys in the corner. The woman turned to the man, her expression a mixture of relief and apprehension. "Thank you," she whispered. I don't know what else to say." There was a sincerity in her words that was impossible to dismiss. The man offered her a towel to dry off and a seat near the small fireplace. He could see the exhaustion etched into her face, the strain of carrying both herself and her child through hardship. He realized that this was more than a momentary visit. This was a turning point, a situation that required careful thought and compassion. He knew that whatever decision he made tonight would matter not just to him, but to 2 other lives. As she sat down, wrapping the child in a dry blanket, the man felt a mixture of emotions: sympathy, concern, and a cautious hope. He realized that life had a way of surprising him when he least expected it. The quiet evening he had planned had been interrupted, but perhaps for a reason. He had been given a chance to make a difference, to offer safety and comfort in a world that often seemed harsh and indifferent. The rain continued to fall outside, tapping against the windows like a steady heartbeat. Inside, the room was warm and dry, filled with the quiet presence of those seeking refuge. The man watched the child settle into the blanket, his small face relaxing as he closed his eyes. The widow sat beside him, her hands folded in her lap, and she finally allowed herself a small sigh of relief. In that moment, the man realized that this encounter, unexpected as it was, could change the course of all their lives. He didn't know what challenges lay ahead, but he knew one thing: he couldn't turn them away. Compassion, after all, was not always easy, but it was necessary. And as he looked at the 2 fragile lives in front of him, he understood that sometimes being human meant opening one's door to those who needed it most, even when it was inconvenient, even when it was uncomfortable. The night wore on and the storm outside grew stronger, yet inside, there was a small sense of peace. The man sat quietly, observing the child's gentle breathing, the widow's relieved expression, and the flickering light of the fireplace casting warm shadows across the room. It was a quiet beginning, but it was a beginning nonetheless. A moment where compassion and humanity met, where lives intersected unexpectedly. And in that quiet house on that rainy evening, the man understood that tonight, he would do what he could to offer shelter, warmth, and hope. The rest of the story was uncertain, but for now there was safety, there was care, and there was the beginning of a connection that neither of them would forget. The evening settled into a quiet rhythm, though the tension in the room was far from gone. The rain continued to pour outside, hitting the roof with steady persistence, as if urging the man to think carefully about what lay ahead. The widow sat on the small sofa, her child now asleep under a warm blanket, the soft rise and fall of his chest a comforting sight. She finally dared to meet the man's gaze. Her eyes were heavy with worry and fatigue, but they also held a kind of raw honesty that made it impossible for him to look away. "I know this is strange," she began, her voice trembling slightly, "and I don't want to cause trouble. I don't know where else to turn." She paused, biting her lip as if weighing her next words carefully. "My husband, he's gone. There's no one to help me. I don't have family nearby, and I don't have money. I just want my son to be safe, and I'm desperate." The man listened quietly, carefully. He could feel the weight of her words pressing against him, a combination of vulnerability, fear, and need. He had seen people ask for help before, but never like this. There was no pride in her voice, no attempt to manipulate or exaggerate. She was simply a mother, standing in the middle of a storm, asking for help to protect her child. She hesitated and then, in a softer tone, almost like a whisper, added, I know this may sound strange or forward, but I don't have anything else to offer. I need someone to protect us. I don't want to take advantage of you, but I have nothing else. I can't survive alone." Her hands shook slightly as she spoke, and the man noticed the effort it took for her to keep her composure. The man's mind raced. He felt a strong urge to help, but he also felt unease. This was not a simple favor or act of kindness. It was a deep, personal request. He thought about the responsibility, the ethics, and the implications of any decision he made. Helping someone in need was one thing, but becoming part of their life in such a personal way was something else entirely. He had always valued boundaries and fairness, and this situation challenged both. He took a deep breath, trying to steady himself. I understand your situation," he said slowly, "but we need to be careful. There are limits to what I can do, and I want to make sure we do things properly for your child's safety and your own." The widow nodded, relief and hope flickering across her face. She had been expecting rejection or at least skepticism, but his words were measured and kind. She felt a small spark of trust begin to grow. I understand," she said softly. "I'm not asking for much, just a safe place to stay, even for a short time. I don't want to cause trouble." The man gestured to a chair near the small fireplace. "Sit. Let's talk about what we can do. We need a plan, something safe and manageable. I can't promise forever, but I can promise, for now, we'll make sure your son is safe." The woman sat down carefully, keeping the child close to her. She felt a mixture of gratitude, anxiety, and shame. It was hard for her to ask for help in such a direct way. She had always been independent, relying on herself and her husband for stability. Now, with him gone, she was forced into a situation that made her feel exposed, vulnerable, and uncertain. But she also knew that survival meant accepting help when it came, no matter how uncomfortable it felt. The man continued to speak, carefully outlining what he could offer. "You can stay here tonight. We'll make sure your son has food, warmth, and rest. Tomorrow, we'll see what other options are available. There are services, jobs, and resources we can look into. But tonight, you are safe." Tears welled up in her eyes, but she blinked them back, refusing to let them fall. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. I don't know how to repay you. I just want my son to be safe. That's all that matters." The man felt a deep empathy for her. He could see the exhaustion in her body, the worry lines etched on her face, and the small, gentle movements she made to comfort her child. He realized that her offer, however strange it had been, was not meant to manipulate him. It was the plea of a mother in desperate circumstances, a woman trying to navigate a world that suddenly felt unsafe and lonely. For a moment, silence filled the room, broken only by the soft sound of rain outside and the gentle breathing of the child. It was a heavy silence, but not an uncomfortable one. It was the kind of silence that comes when people are carefully measuring trust, empathy, and intention. The man finally spoke again. "We need to think about tomorrow and the days after. Staying here is just the beginning. You need support that goes beyond tonight. I can help you find resources, jobs, and maybe even a small place to live. But it will require effort, and you will need to trust the process." The widow nodded, understanding that help came with responsibility. I can do that," she said. I want my son to have a safe home. That's all I ask." He offered her some dry clothes and blankets. She accepted gratefully, changing her wet coat and tucking herself and her child into warmth. The little boy stirred slightly, sensing the comfort of safety, and clung to his mother. The man watched this quietly, noticing the way the child's small fingers intertwined with her own, and felt a profound sense of responsibility settle on his shoulders. As the night wore on, they shared a simple meal. The woman ate little, her appetite suppressed by worry, but the child seemed to find some joy in the warmth of the food and the company. The man observed her carefully, noting the fatigue in her movements, the careful way she ensured her child was comfortable, and the quiet strength that shone through despite her fear. She was vulnerable, yes, but she was also remarkably resilient. They spoke quietly, exchanging stories about their lives. The widow told the man about her husband, about the small joys and the struggles they had faced together. She spoke of dreams for her child, hopes for a future that now felt uncertain. The man listened, offering empathy and understanding, careful not to judge or dismiss her feelings. He realized that sometimes the most important thing was simply listening, giving someone the space to share their grief and fear. The conversation eventually shifted to practical matters. The man explained local support services, resources for single mothers, and options for childcare and work. The widow listened intently, absorbing every detail, asking questions and taking notes in her mind. She felt a cautious hope begin to grow, a realization that help was possible without compromising her dignity or safety. Hours passed, and the rain began to lighten, the storm outside slowly fading into a gentle drizzle. The room grew quiet again as the child slept peacefully, his breathing steady and calm. The widow leaned back, exhausted but relieved, and the man felt a quiet satisfaction in having provided safety and comfort, even if only for one night. For the first time in weeks, perhaps months, the widow felt a small sense of peace. She was still in a difficult situation, still facing uncertainty, but she was no longer alone. And in that moment, she realized that asking for help was not a sign of weakness. It was a step towards survival, a choice to protect her child at all costs. The man, too, reflected on the evening. He realized that helping someone in desperate need was never simple. It required judgment, empathy, and courage. It was a delicate balance between offering assistance and maintaining boundaries, between protecting others and protecting oneself. But despite the challenges, he felt a sense of purpose he hadn't felt in years. By the time the night drew to a close, the widow and her child were settled, safe and warm. The man made sure they had everything they needed for the night, and he prepared for what tomorrow might bring. The rain had stopped outside, leaving the world damp and quiet, but inside there was a small flame of hope flickering softly. This was not the end of their journey, it was only the beginning. There would be challenges ahead, moments of doubt and fear, and decisions that would test their character. But for now, they had survived the storm together. And sometimes, surviving one night, offering kindness and safety in the face of desperation, was the most important step anyone could take. The next morning began with a soft gray light filtering through the curtains. The rain from the previous night had left the streets wet and glistening, and the air smelled fresh and clean. The man had risen early, quietly moving around his small home to make breakfast while the widow and her child still slept. He kept his movements deliberate and calm, not wanting to disturb the fragile sense of peace that had settled over the room the night before. As he prepared simple bread, eggs, and tea, he thought about the events of the previous evening. His mind was filled with questions about the future. How could he help her in a way that was meaningful, respectful, and safe? How could he provide shelter and comfort without compromising either of their dignity? These were not easy questions, and he knew that careful thought and patience would be required. Soon, the soft sound of movement in the bedroom told him that the widow was awake. She appeared in the doorway, her hair still damp, and her eyes heavy with fatigue but alert. The child clutched a small blanket and yawned, rubbing his eyes. The woman offered a small, tired smile to the man, and he nodded in acknowledgement. There was no need for words. The quiet understanding between them spoke volumes. "Breakfast is ready," he said gently, gesturing toward the small kitchen table. The woman helped her child down from the bed, and together they joined him. The child's small hands reached for a piece of bread, and he smiled faintly as he tasted the warm meal. The widow watched him carefully, relief and gratitude shining in her eyes. It was a simple moment, ordinary in many ways, but for them, it carried a quiet significance, a sense of normalcy in a life that had recently been turned upside down. After breakfast, the man decided it was time to have a serious conversation. He knew that helping someone in such a vulnerable situation required clarity, honesty, and boundaries. He led the woman to a small corner of the living room, away from the child's toys and distractions, and gestured for her to sit. She did so immediately, sensing the importance of the moment. "I want to help you," he began, his voice calm but firm. "But we need to set some rules. This is important for both your safety and mine. I can provide shelter, food, and guidance, but we must respect boundaries. I cannot take advantage of your situation, and you must understand that this is about protection and support, not anything else." The widow listened carefully, nodding slowly. She understood completely. Her situation had been desperate, and she had felt the weight of helplessness pressing down on her for weeks. She had come to him out of pure necessity, but she also valued her dignity and wanted to maintain her integrity. Hearing his words made her feel both reassured and respected. "Thank you," she said softly. I don't want to cause problems. I just want to keep my son safe and have a little time to figure things out. I promise I will respect your rules." The man gave a small nod, feeling a sense of relief. It was not easy to navigate these situations, and he knew that trust was fragile. But the widow's honesty and sincerity gave him confidence that they could move forward without misunderstanding. "Good," he said. "We will take things one step at a time. Tonight you are safe. Tomorrow we will talk about longer-term plans. We need to make sure that you and your child can survive independently, but with support." With boundaries clearly established, the man began to take small steps to help them. He gave her some extra clothes and blankets, ensuring that both she and her child would be comfortable. He showed her where she could store her few belongings and created a small, safe space for the child to play. The widow observed quietly, appreciating his thoughtfulness and care. It was a small gesture, but it made her feel valued, not just as a mother in need, but as a human being deserving of dignity. Over the next few days, the man helped the widow in practical ways. He guided her to local services that could provide temporary financial assistance and childcare. He offered advice on job opportunities that were realistic for someone with her experience and situation. Together, they made a list of short-term and long-term goals, carefully planning steps that would lead to her independence. The widow was attentive and eager to follow his advice. She understood that the path would be challenging, but for the first time in weeks, she felt a glimmer of hope. During this time, they shared moments of quiet companionship. The widow cooked simple meals in the small kitchen, while the man helped clean and organize the space. The child began to grow comfortable in the new routine, smiling and laughing in small, genuine bursts of joy. Watching the child play and explore safely was one of the man's favorite moments of the day. It reminded him of the importance of providing stability and care, especially in the lives of those who had been shaken by loss. Evenings were spent talking quietly, sharing memories and stories. The widow spoke about her late husband, describing him not with sadness alone, but with fondness and respect. She spoke of their dreams and the life they had planned together. The man listened, offering empathy without judgment, careful to create a space where she could feel heard and understood. It was a delicate balance, providing comfort without overstepping, offering guidance without dominating, but he navigated it with care. One afternoon, the widow expressed her gratitude in a way that touched him deeply. "I don't know how to thank you," she said. I came here with nothing, and you've given me more than I ever expected. Not just shelter, but dignity. That matters more than anything else." Her words were quiet but powerful, a recognition of the thoughtfulness and integrity he had shown. The man smiled faintly, feeling a sense of fulfillment he hadn't felt in years. "It's not about thanks," he said. "It's about making sure you and your child are safe and supported. That's what matters. The rest will follow." As the days passed, the widow and the man began to develop a routine that balanced independence with support. She took small steps toward finding work, attending local offices for assistance, and preparing meals efficiently. He offered advice when needed, but he allowed her to make her own decisions. The child thrived in this environment, his laughter becoming a steady presence in the small home. Despite the growing comfort, the man remained vigilant about boundaries. He understood that their relationship was one of support, not dependence. He ensured that all interactions remained respectful, maintaining a professional and caring tone. This structure allowed the widow to regain confidence in herself, knowing that help did not mean loss of autonomy. It was a careful dance of trust, empathy, and patience. One rainy evening, similar to the first, the widow paused and reflected on how far they had come. She realized that her initial plea, though desperate, had been met with compassion and integrity. She had feared exploitation or judgment, but instead, she found guidance, understanding, and protection. It was a powerful lesson in human kindness, and she felt a deep sense of gratitude. The man, too, reflected on the progress they had made. He recognized that helping someone required more than just shelter. It required patience, respect, and careful attention to emotional as well as practical needs. He felt a growing sense of purpose, knowing that his actions were making a real difference in the life of a mother and her child. By the end of the week, a sense of trust had settled between them. The widow knew she could rely on him for support, and the man knew he could trust her to respect boundaries and work toward independence. The child had grown comfortable and happy, a small beacon of hope in the midst of their challenges. Together, they had created a temporary home built on mutual respect, empathy, and care. It was not perfect, and the future remained uncertain, but for the moment they had found stability. This part of their journey highlighted the power of human kindness, the importance of boundaries, and the quiet strength that comes from helping others with dignity. It was clear that the road ahead would not be easy, but both the widow and the man felt a sense of resilience growing between them. They had navigated the initial challenges with patience and integrity, and they were now prepared to face the next steps, finding long-term solutions, building independence, and continuing to care for each other in a way that respected everyone involved. In the quiet of that small home, the rain falling gently outside, there was a sense of calm and cautious optimism. They had survived the initial storm, and now they were learning to navigate life together with care, respect, and hope. The foundation of trust and compassion had been laid, and it would guide them through the challenges still to come. Weeks passed, and life in the small home began to settle into a quiet rhythm. The widow and her child had grown comfortable in their temporary surroundings, and the man had found a careful balance between providing support and maintaining boundaries. The initial tension of uncertainty had given way to trust, and slowly, a genuine connection began to form, not the kind of connection based on romance, but a bond of respect, care, and mutual understanding. Each morning began with a routine that brought stability to all three lives. The child woke first, small hands reaching for his mother, calling her softly. She rose immediately, comforting him, helping him dress and preparing breakfast. The man, already awake, would quietly prepare his own tea or assist with simple chores. These small routines, making food, cleaning, organizing, formed the foundation of a calm, predictable life, something that had been missing for the widow and her child. The child's laughter became a common sound in the house. He ran around with a small ball or a set of toys, his energy unstoppable. Watching him, the widow sometimes paused, overwhelmed with emotion. Her husband was gone, but here, in this small, humble home, her son had a chance to smile, to play, and to grow without fear. The man often joined in these moments, sitting on the floor and helping the child with puzzles or simple games. It was in these shared activities that trust and warmth grew naturally. One morning, after the child had left for a small playgroup nearby, the man and widow sat together over tea. She spoke softly, recounting her experiences over the past months. "I never thought I could feel this safe again," she admitted. "After my husband, I felt like everything was falling apart. I didn't know where to go or what to do, but now I feel like there is a path forward." The man listened quietly, sipping his tea. "It hasn't been easy," he said, "and it won't always be, but you've made progress. You're taking steps every day toward independence. That's what matters." His words were calm, steady, and supportive. They carried no judgment, only encouragement. She nodded, feeling the truth in what he said. Over the following days, the widow took small but important steps toward regaining control over her life. She visited local offices for assistance, applied for a small job at a nearby shop, and began organizing her own little corner of the home for study and planning. The man offered guidance when needed, helping her fill out forms or understand procedures, but he allowed her to take the lead. This approach gave her confidence and a sense of ownership over her own life. The child's presence made every day feel fuller and brighter. He had begun to call the man uncle, a small but meaningful gesture that filled the man with a quiet warmth. At first, it had made him nervous. He was not used to such closeness or responsibility. But over time, he realized that this bond was healthy, built on care and trust rather than obligation or dependence. The child's affection reminded him of the importance of providing stability and emotional safety. Evenings became a time of quiet reflection and conversation. The widow would sometimes share memories of her late husband, speaking with both sadness and fondness. She recounted simple stories, the way he laughed, the little routines they shared, the small dreams they had for their son. The man listened carefully, never interrupting, offering empathy through gentle nods and quiet acknowledgement. These conversations allowed her to process her grief and find comfort in remembering the love she had once known. One evening she paused and said, "I never thought I would find someone who understands without judging. You've shown me kindness in a way I didn't expect. It's more than shelter or food. It's respect. That matters more than anything." The man felt a quiet satisfaction, understanding the depth of what she was saying. Providing help was not just about material needs. It was about restoring dignity and offering emotional support. He replied softly, "It's what anyone should do for another human being in need." We all need someone to trust, especially during difficult times. That trust is worth more than anything else. The widow's efforts to regain independence were matched by her growing confidence. She began to contribute more to the household, cooking meals, cleaning, and managing daily routines. The man observed these changes with a sense of pride and reassurance. She was not just surviving, she was thriving, taking control of her life and slowly rebuilding a sense of normalcy. Meanwhile, small moments of shared joy continued to deepen their bond. The child's excitement at seeing small animals in the garden, the widow's laughter when the child made a funny remark, the man's quiet encouragement during everyday tasks. These simple moments created a foundation of warmth and friendship. It was not dramatic or sensational, but it was real and meaningful. One afternoon, they all went for a walk in the nearby park. The child ran ahead, chasing birds and laughing freely, while the widow held the man's hand briefly, expressing a simple gratitude in the gesture. There were no words exchanged, but the quiet understanding between them was clear. They were a small, makeshift family, bound not by blood, but by care, trust, and mutual support. As the days passed, the widow became more confident in her ability to manage her own life. She began to explore part-time work opportunities seriously, applying to local shops and offices. The man helped by giving advice on schedules, transportation, and expectations, but he never dictated her choices. He understood that empowerment came from allowing her to make her own decisions, even if mistakes occurred. The child's routine also stabilized. He attended a small community playgroup during the day, socializing with other children and developing friendships. The widow and the man worked together to ensure he had a balanced day, play, study, and rest. They celebrated small milestones, the child learning to count, tying his shoes, or reciting a short poem. Each achievement was a reminder of progress and hope. Even as life grew more structured, the bond between the widow and the man deepened in subtle ways. They began to share small moments of quiet reflection, tea in the evenings, or simple conversations about hopes for the future. There was trust, respect, and a gentle warmth that neither had anticipated when they first met. This connection was not romantic. It was a foundation of humanity and compassion, built on mutual understanding. One evening, after the child had gone to bed, the widow spoke softly. "I feel like I can breathe again," she admitted. "I still have fears, of course, but I see a path forward, and I see that there are people who care, even strangers. That gives me hope." The man nodded, feeling the weight and truth of her words. "Hope is important," he said. "It's the first step toward change. You've taken the next steps yourself, working, planning, caring for your child. I've only helped guide you. You're the one creating the life you want." She smiled faintly, a mixture of gratitude and determination. "I want to give my son a life that feels safe and full of love," she said, "and I want to prove to myself that I can do it, even after everything I've been through." The man felt a deep sense of satisfaction. He realized that the true impact of his help was not in shelter or food alone, but in restoring confidence, providing guidance, and creating a safe environment where healing and growth could occur. The widow's determination and resilience inspired him, reminding him of the quiet strength found in those who face adversity with courage. The weeks continued with steady progress. The widow began to secure part-time work, contributing to her household and gaining financial independence. The child thrived in school and play, becoming more confident and expressive. And the man continued to provide guidance, emotional support, and a safe environment, careful to maintain boundaries while nurturing trust. Through these months, the trio formed a bond that was subtle yet profound. It was a bond built not on obligation or dependence, but on mutual respect, trust, and care. The widow learned that asking for help did not diminish her worth, it strengthened her resilience. The man learned that providing help required patience, empathy, and careful attention to emotional needs. And the child, surrounded by stability and kindness, began to thrive in ways that were truly remarkable. In the quiet evenings, as rain or sun touched the windows of the small home, there was a sense of calm, growth, and cautious optimism. Life had not been easy, but they had navigated challenges together, learning lessons of trust, compassion, and resilience. And as the days passed, it became clear that even in the most difficult circumstances, human connection, built on respect and care, could create a foundation strong enough to face the future. The morning air was crisp and bright, a welcome change from the rainy days that had marked their early weeks together. The widow moved quietly around the small home, tidying up and preparing a simple breakfast. Her movements were confident now, steady and assured. She had grown accustomed to her temporary surroundings, but more importantly, she had grown in self-reliance. The small home, which had once been a place of uncertainty and vulnerability, had become a space of quiet accomplishment and hope. Her son stirred from his sleep, stretching and rubbing his eyes. The widow helped him dress and gave him a warm hug, feeling a deep sense of pride in how far they had come. The child had adapted beautifully to their routine, happy and secure, a small beacon of resilience and joy. Watching him, she realized that she had achieved what she had wanted most, a sense of stability for her child, a foundation from which he could grow confidently. The man entered the kitchen, carrying a tray with tea and toast. He observed the scene quietly, noting the calm confidence in the widow's movements. She met his eyes and offered a small smile, one that was full of gratitude and quiet strength. Their relationship had transformed over the weeks, from strangers brought together by circumstance to companions in a journey of trust, care, and mutual support. Yet, he knew the time had come to take the next step, helping her transition toward independence. "I think today we should talk about your move," he said gently, setting the tray down. "You've done everything you needed to do. You've secured part-time work, found resources for childcare, and proven that you can manage on your own. I believe you're ready." The widow felt a mixture of excitement and nervousness. Leaving the small home where she had found safety, warmth, and trust was not easy. Yet she also understood that independence was the ultimate goal, the reason she had come to the man in the first place. She nodded, swallowing her emotions. "Yes," she said softly, "I think it's time. My son and I were ready to start a new chapter." Together, they reviewed the plans for her transition. The man had helped her locate a modest apartment nearby, safe and clean, with a small playground for her son. He assisted with paperwork, arranging initial deposits and coordinating move-in schedules. The widow took in every detail carefully, ensuring she understood the responsibilities that came with her new home. The process was practical and grounded, emphasizing preparedness and planning, and she appreciated the thoroughness and care he provided. The move itself was quiet and unhurried. The child carried a small bag of favorite toys, excited about the adventure but sensing the gravity of the day. The widow held his hand as they walked to the new apartment, her heart swelling with a mix of anticipation and gratitude. Arriving at the small home, she unlocked the door and stepped inside, taking in the modest but welcoming space. It was clean, bright, and quiet, a space she could now truly call her own. The man helped carry the remaining boxes and bags, setting them down carefully. "This is your home now," he said gently. "It's yours to care for, to make your own. You've earned this independence, and I have no doubt that you will succeed." The widow felt tears prick her eyes, but she blinked them back, refusing to let emotion overwhelm her. "Thank you," she whispered, "for everything, for helping me and my son, for showing kindness and for trusting me. I don't know how I would have done this without you." The man shook his head, smiling faintly. "You did it yourself," he said. "I only guided you. You took the steps, made the decisions, and worked hard. That's what matters. You're capable, strong, and resilient. Never forget that." They spent the next hour arranging the apartment. The child helped unpack small toys and books, his laughter filling the space with life. The widow placed familiar items in carefully chosen spots, creating a sense of home and stability. The man offered advice when asked, but mostly observed, understanding that the widow needed to claim this space as her own, with his role gradually stepping back. Finally, as the sun dipped lower in the sky, casting a warm glow across the room, the time came for farewell. The widow, her child, and the man stood in the small living area, taking in the moment. It was bittersweet, joy and pride mixed with a sense of loss. They had shared weeks of struggle, hope, and growth, forming a bond that would leave a lasting mark on all their lives. The child hugged the man tightly, whispering a shy, "Thank you, Uncle." The man felt a lump in his throat. He had never expected to feel such a connection, yet the sincerity of the gesture touched him deeply. He knelt to return the hug, careful not to overwhelm the child with emotion. "Take care, little one," he said softly. "Keep being brave and kind." The widow followed, offering her own heartfelt embrace. "We will never forget what you've done for us," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "You showed us that kindness and care still exist in the world. You gave us hope when everything seemed lost. Thank you." The man nodded, his own voice quiet but firm. "You don't need to thank me. The real thanks is seeing you and your son thrive. That's enough." He took a deep breath, trying to steady himself. "Remember what you've learned here. Trust yourself. You are stronger than you think." The final moments were quiet. They shared smiles, words of encouragement, and gentle reminders of resilience and courage. The widow held her child's hand tightly, ready to step into the next chapter of their lives, and the man watched them, feeling a deep sense of fulfillment. It was a different kind of satisfaction, one that came not from personal gain, but from witnessing the growth and success of others. After the farewell, the widow and her child settled into their new apartment. She unpacked the last boxes, arranging the space carefully and making it feel warm and welcoming. The child explored eagerly, finding joy in the small, familiar toys he had carried with him. The widow smiled, watching him, and felt a deep sense of accomplishment. They were no longer dependent on anyone. They had built a foundation for the future. Meanwhile, the man returned to his own home, feeling a mixture of relief and quiet pride. The house felt emptier, yes, but he also felt a deep sense of satisfaction. He had helped two lives in meaningful ways, offering safety, guidance, and compassion. He reflected on the journey, remembering the first rainy night, the desperation in the widow's eyes, and the small victories that had followed. It was a journey of trust, care, and human connection, one that had changed all their lives. He realized that sometimes, helping others meant more than providing immediate relief. It meant offering guidance, maintaining boundaries, and nurturing confidence. It meant showing empathy without judgment and allowing others to regain independence on their own terms. And through this, he had discovered something about himself, the joy and fulfillment of giving support without expecting anything in return. Days passed, and the man occasionally visited to check on the widow and her child. Each visit was filled with small updates, laughter, and reassurance. The child had begun school, making friends and adjusting beautifully. The widow was confident in her job, managing her responsibilities and growing steadily. Both were thriving, evidence of the progress they had made together. The bond they shared remained strong, though it had changed. It was no longer about immediate need or dependence, but about respect, gratitude, and shared memories. The widow often thought back to the first night she had knocked on his door, remembering the fear and desperation that had driven her to seek help. And she was filled with gratitude, not just for the shelter but for the guidance, patience, and humanity he had shown. The man, in turn, remembered the same night, the child's wide eyes, the widow's trembling voice, the sudden responsibility that had been placed in his hands. He had faced moral dilemmas, uncertainty, and careful decisions, but he had acted with empathy and care, and the outcome had been deeply rewarding. It reminded him of the power of human connection and the importance of helping others with dignity and respect. In the quiet of the evening, he reflected on the journey. Life had a way of testing people, placing challenges that seemed insurmountable. But through patience, kindness, and careful guidance, it was possible to make a real difference in someone's life. And sometimes, even a small act of help could create ripples that changed the course of another person's future. For the widow, the man, and the child, that journey had been one of struggle, growth, and triumph. They had navigated fear, grief, and uncertainty, and they had emerged stronger, more confident, and more connected. The small home that had first been a place of shelter had become a symbol of hope, courage, and resilience. And as they moved forward in their separate but connected lives, they carried with them the lessons of compassion, dignity, and the quiet power of helping others.